Hello. Thank you for coming. I've been a middle school teacher for a number of years now at an inner city school in Toronto. I've been passionate about challenging status quo to get students more passionate about learning and to work actively in their community. 2 years ago, I was teaching 7-8 science, and my students were involved in an inquiry about water in their community, water issues in their community. And out of that arose an inquiry of my own. What would happen to students' learning if I removed grades and replaced it with feedback from students and myself? As a student myself, I always received C's. Doesn't matter what I did, how hard I worked, I always received C's. And from that, I concluded I wasn't very bright and that I was predetermined as a C student, so why should I bother learning? And unfortunately, I also found myself falling into that same trap as a teacher over and over again. So I constantly had to get myself out of that. So a couple of years ago, when the Water Docs project came along, I had 60 students, and there were several different projects going because they all had a different water issue that they were exploring. And when I started to think about how am I going to assess this, I got overwhelmed, and I actually didn't really know what to do. I saw out of 60 students, maybe only 2 were not engaged, and I can say that quite honestly. So I just kind of let them carry on. The students were learning, they were engaging, and they were all progressing except for maybe these 2 students. But of course, as ministry dictates, I did have to write a report card. So when report card time came, and I had always continued kind of looking at their work and coaching them along, giving them feedback. My most significant discovery was actually these 3 students. I had perceived them to be the weakest group, and they had actually progressed the most. So I asked myself the question, was this because I hadn't given any marks, but I had just continually given everyone feedback. I hadn't actually given any marks because as I said, I was overwhelmed. I didn't actually know how to give marks at that point. I have to thank Julia Pagel from CBC because she actually documented my year's progress, and so I was able to hear the students at the beginning of the project and after the project, after she published her podcast. So I'll just start with the students talking about at the very beginning, what they felt about marks. So
I wonder what you would think about not having any grades at all. Do you think that would work?
Like, no one would really participate in a lot of things. No one would put much effort into a school.
Yeah, and if you didn't have the mark, it would feel like you're just doing it for nothing. Like, it would come to no use.
I feel nervous and, anxious because I think we all have a lot of pressure on us, especially being in, the older grades. We have more pressure on getting better grades so we can get into better high schools, we can get into better universities, we can get better jobs. But I also think it's just this idea that's put into our heads because a lot of it's not really true. When you're 23 and looking for a job, you're not going to look at your report card you got when you were 13. That's 10 years from now. I just think it's false pressure that is put on us from parents or people who want to see you succeed but are kind of giving in the wrong idea to you and making you feel nervous. I don't know if I'd try as hard, to be honest, if there are no grades attached at school. I think I'd just be okay, well, I want to learn something, but would I try as hard? I don't think so. My schoolwork, to be honest.
Even after everything you just said?
Yeah.
how do I go forward? Right. So out of this, from the students, so the students that performed, what I found, students that performed at C or less improved the most. Their confidence about learning grew, and they were willing to take more risks. The students who were high achievers and always looking how to get more marks out of an assignment appeared more relaxed and also were taking more risks. By the end of the year, the students were eager to receive feedback from their peers. They were also actually very eager to give feedback to their peers. They were providing relevant, thoughtful feedback, talking positively about the usefulness of comments and applying it, improving upon their learning through the reflection of others' learning, and they weren't asking about marks at all. Me. This inquiry made me freer to tackle my own bias around students as learners. I was able to see students' strengths more clearly. I was learning from the feedback that students were providing. They had insights that I hadn't noticed. And when it came to having to write the report card, I found it more satisfying as I felt the marks were much more holistic, from a more holistic viewpoint than just me. From the parents, nobody ever called me or asked me to see marks. At parent interviews, the parents would ask how I came to the mark, and when I explained that students receive feedback, and I would show them the feedback, I'd share the feedback with them. So I had told them that, okay, I did feedback this year rather than marks during the year. The conversation became much deeper as the conversation became more about their children's strengths and ways to progress rather than how could my child get higher marks. And I felt that parents seemed more satisfied than usual at the end of the interview. So this last slide is, you're going to hear students talk about, so this is at the end of the year, and you'll hear.
When they get feedback, do they actually read it and apply it? There has been a lot of peer evaluation in the last month or so, so maybe, do you value the feedback from your peers? Yeah. Okay.
When my peers evaluate me, most of the time they're my friends, and sometimes they don't give honest feedback because sometimes they might want to give you a higher mark or something like that. Trying to help me. And when I got myself, sometimes I realize what mistakes I've done, and I try to improve sometimes. And when my teacher does it, I take it a little bit more seriously, and I use her feedback to improve and get a higher mark.
I think comments from my peers help because I usually understand what they mean more than what it might come from a teacher. Because I usually relate to my peers more than I could relate to my teachers.
So say when you're doing an assignment again, and you remember those comments, and say there was a mark also with the last one, do you find it more motivating to kind of have comments to think about and to push you forward, as opposed to last time I got a 75, I'm just shooting to get better than that? Does that make sense?
I think so. What would be more motivating, a mark or comments?
Yeah.
I think comments are more helpful because when it's a mark, it's just a number or a letter, whatever grade you get. It's not as helpful as it could be if it was comments, because when it's a comment, it tells you how you can get better, and if it's marked, it's just telling you that maybe you need space to improve or you're doing well, but not why. So if I was doing well on the last assignment and I was like, okay, this is good, and then for the next assignment, since I didn't know why I was doing it well, maybe for the next assignment I didn't include it, so I got a lower mark. But if there were comments, I'd make sure for the next assignment to include that.
So generally, the feedback was positive from the students, from parents, and from my admin. But actually, ironically enough, because I didn't tell anybody I was doing this experiment, I didn't tell the students or the parents because I wanted to see if they would notice that they weren't getting marks. And there's only one student bothered, was sort of bugging me after a presentation she did, and I just said, oh, well, just read the feedback that everyone's giving you. And she eventually kind of stopped asking me, but she was a little relentless for a while. But I knew if I told her, then she'd tell everybody. And it was when a couple of the teachers at the end of the year found out, they were angry with me. I'm not sure why, but I didn't investigate that. So I don't know how to... Oh, thank you.